This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
I want to welcome you to a special episode of Real Talk. What makes it so special, you ask? Well, it marks the return of Tristin Hopper, the national correspondent, journalist for the National Post, who will be checking in from British Columbia in just a second. I'm curious to pick Tristin's brain on a number of things, including based on our episode just prior to this. So this would have been our episode on Wednesday, July 17th, the conversation with Alberta Medical Association President Paul Parks, who's an ER doc that practices out of Southern Alberta, out of Medicine Hat. Really interesting conversation, about an hour long. Dr. Parks hangs out with us in studio, and we get to a whole bunch of stuff, including some of the areas of healthcare in Alberta that are absolutely, unabashedly, full-blown, undeniably in crisis. And that includes people waitlisted for months and months to get cancer care, people that are waitlisted for well over a year to get surgeries or MRIs, people that simply can't find a family doctor. We've had interesting response to that interview as well. I don't know how closely you've been paying attention, Johnny, to our social media in particular. We draw kind of different comments on the different platforms. So we push out a short, sort of a 60-second highlight for those that subscribe to our YouTube channel every week, and you get some interesting comments on YouTube. On TikTok, you get a lot of the comedians. On Instagram, surprisingly, I don't know why I'm saying that, but surprisingly, I guess, on Instagram, more than just photos, you get some insightful commentary from people on Instagram, but Twitter is like either for or against, black or white, minds made up, people in the trenches, trading punches. And there was a trend that had surfaced a little bit in the live chat as we talked to Dr. Parks. And it was Real Talker Kenzie who, number one, kicked into the YouTube super chat. So shout out to Kenzie for that. But Kenzie had a question around, could Alberta begin to address or take one step to address its shortage of family docs by bringing back all the doctors that left because of vaccine mandates? And I saw the question. I went, okay, because we want to, believe, obviously, that there are a ton of different angles of approach on an interview, and I'm certainly not the decider of questions, but I'm sitting there thinking, like, critically to myself as we're talking to Dr. Parks, is that really a thing? Like, I think everybody's kind of heard the one story or the two stories of, like, the doctor here or the nurse there that went on their Facebook in the middle of COVID and said that they couldn't work or said they were being kicked out of their career. In some cases, obviously, the language was much more inflammatory than that. And I don't blame people at a time of crisis and a time of great frustration with strong opinions and strong conviction for saying whatever they want to say, in particular when they feel like or when their careers are being threatened. So I get that. But part of me is going, is that really, like, were we like bleeding doctors and nurses because of the vaccine mandates? I don't know, right? So we asked Dr. Parks about that. If you want to hear his answer, which was, I think, a gracious one. He took the question, he addressed it, and then he moved on. You can listen to our interview. That's the July 17th episode of Real Talk, where we talk about healthcare and crisis. But there's been an interesting trend since on Twitter where the anti-vaxxers have almost taken over the commentary when we're starting to ask now about how do we attract more family doctors? How do we address some of the issues that people have? How do we acknowledge and act on an unacceptable trend where people that are being diagnosed with cancer in the ER, try that one on for size, right? They can't get into a family doctor because they don't have one. They're not going to wait in line at some drop-in, walk-in medical clinic, because who has time for that? And so they pop into the ER when they can't ignore pain or a lump or a symptom any longer. And then an ER doc is ordering tests and basically delivering the most grim, the most gut-wrenching news that somebody can receive, right? And so how do you move on from that? Wow. Now the commentary is turning into cancer rates are skyrocketing because of the vaccines. And we're starting to have this interview amplified by some pretty loud voices on that side of the ledger, both here in Canada and outside. Pretty interesting trend, and I wanted to put this out to Real Talkers. Talk at ryanjesperson.com is where you can send us your thoughts. We have been talking on the show about skyrocketing, and I mean, that's a heavy word to use, but there's a significant increase in cancer rates, especially when you're comparing decades or generations over others, in particular with young people. but I'd be curious to know what element of our population, what percentage, what ratio of our population. Is it 2%? Is it 5%? Is it 20% that believes that this has some tie-in to COVID vaccines? Is this something that serious people are serious about, or are we getting trolled on social media? I'm always open to trends and to analyzing what we're seeing on social media, including responses to our social media in the context of future conversations on the show. I'm not going to ignore this out of the sake of ignoring it, but I'm curious to know what percentage of the population, whether it's our live tuning population in the morning, whether it's those that are downloading the podcast or watching YouTube later, those of you that are going to hear this interview or heard the one with Dr. Paul Parks, send us a note. Let us know what you think. I'm curious to know if this is, do you say a mainstream concern or something that mainstream, average, ordinary folks have on their mind? Or is this the same old people banging the same old drum on the same old conspiracy theory? Let us know what you think. Tristin Hopper in just a second. This episode is happening with the support of HRO Training, and I want to direct you to hro.training to learn more about what we're going to be talking about here. And this is an invitation to join host Chris Labossiere, who's the CEO of We Know Training, and Rob Stewart. You heard Rob on the show back on June 27th. That was a very interesting episode. And by the way, we got an email from Real Talker Erin after that episode talking about workplace safety and some of the absolute wild circumstance that she's been in. It sounds like basically zero safety standards as Erin was kicking off her career. We'll get to that in just a second. But right now, I want to talk to you about transforming your approach to safety, in particular, the culture of your organization, where safety is intrinsic, not an afterthought. This is an opportunity. This is a sign that maybe it's time to start your journey to a safer future. Chris Labossiere, the CEO of We Know Training, and Rob Stewart, an applied behavioral scientist, are going to be joining forces on August 2nd at 11 o'clock a.m. Mountain. That's 1 p.m. Eastern. For a webinar, Ensuring Safety Excellence, Overcoming Contractor Management Challenges. By attending this webinar, you're going to gain invaluable insights into taking a more intelligent approach to evaluating contractor performance, one that accurately predicts future performance and provides a reliable indicator of safety culture. If this is your role in your organization, you don't want to miss this. You can learn more by checking out hro.training/webinars. When you're signing up, don't forget you can take 20% off by using the promo code Ryan20 during checkout. That's Ryan20, all one word. You'll save 20% when you sign up for the webinar on August 2nd at hro.training/webinars. Tristin Hopper joining us in just a moment. I'm curious to ask him. He's working on a new podcast project, and I know, and he's only given me a bit of a tease.
He's coming at us.
He's coming at us. He's featuring Alberta politics in this podcast, but I don't know what it's going to be about. But he asked me if we could leave some time during this interview to talk about former Alberta Premier Bible Bill Aberhart. And so I was immediately intrigued. I said, yeah, we can absolutely take a minute to talk about Bible Bill, the 7th Premier of Alberta, but 1930s era, and pretty interesting time in Alberta politics. Mm-hmm. Like if you look back into the 1930s, the 1940s, this was the era. Like Bible Bill had a radio show. Alberta's current premier has a radio show, but this one was much different. This one was like the Bible Hour. This was like a religious, a weekly radio address. And so this guy was like kind of like the minister for many Albertans and also the premier of Alberta. So it's kind of an interesting situation, an interesting scenario there. But we'll talk to Tristin about a whole bunch of stuff. I did mention also this email that we got from Erin. Do we have a clip locked and loaded from that June 27th episode, Johnny, this workplace safety episode? Why don't we get to this before we talk to Tristin? This was a conversation. If you missed it, we encourage you to check this out. This is back on June 27th on the show. And we're asking the question, and it's kind of like a bit of a gut punch question, but why do so many Canadians die on the job? The numbers are staggering. There are more workplace fatalities, for example, in Alberta than there are in the entire UK every single year. When I heard that from Rob Stewart, I kind of did a bit of a double take. We don't think about these things until we hear these horrific stories. Somebody suffers a fall, or there's a bad accident on a job site. Maybe an excavation caved in. That happened near our house. We saw It was a terrible situation where a temporary worker, like a day hire, was killed in that accident. And so we talked to three people with a real vested interest in this. During that episode, Nicole Gnazdowski is a former journalist. Right now, she's working to bring justice to her brother Andrew's case. Her brother Andrew died. An engineer drowned on a job site trying to retrieve a piece of equipment. Julie Hamilton also joined us. Julie and the Hamilton family has suffered unimaginable loss, losing her son, Tim. She buried her son after he was killed, putting up a tent before a stampede party. That story just sucked, where that centerpiece, that big, long pole, that support pole for the tent hit a power line, and Tim was instantly killed. And then Rob Stewart, as mentioned, the behavioral scientist, joined us. And they talked to us about safety culture. They talked to us about the reality in Canada. Here's what they said.
You wouldn't ever think that this was a dangerous location. And so he was a strong swimmer, and he got in the water to try to retrieve it and didn't come out. The government was aware that this dam was dangerous prior to Andrew even starting work there. Our Utility and Review Board had specifically noted that ahead of time.
The kids knew they were going to have long hours, but they put this tent up. The engineer from First Energy stood there and said, "This is where I want the tent posted." And he marked it on the ground. And then he said, "And I know there's a hydro line directly above, but it shouldn't be a problem." Tim didn't have a chance. And they still held the party the next day as if all they had lost had been a tent peg.
In Alberta, and this is out of the U of A, 50% of employers aren't following basic safety regulations.
How many? What percent?
50%.
Half.
Because it's one thing to go to workers and say, you have a right to refuse, you need to refuse. Behaviorally, that's really, really hard to do, especially when they're younger. But when workers are bringing this up, the stat was 34% of the employers are forcing them to do it or finding somebody else that will actually do it.
So this is the June 27th episode of Real Talk, as we ask the question, why do so many Canadians die on the job? We got this email from Erin, who took the time to write into talk@ryanjesperson.com. She says, wow, thanks for that episode on workplace safety. Erin says, I began working in the construction industry as a young girl. I was like 18 years old at the time. I worked as the shack girl, they called me, who measures and weighs trucks coming in and out of the asphalt plant on Smoky Hill. They were repaving it up there. She says one person died on the job. The equipment, a packer, gave out due to the steepness of the hill and actually ran over the person that had been operating it. Oof. And on that same job, a flag person was rendered a quadriplegic because somebody coming down the hill clearly wasn't paying attention and just hit them. Erin says, then a little bit later in my career, I began working for a land survey company. I was almost crushed there by an earth mover, which fell into the hole that we had dug for a large culvert pipe that I was measuring. Now, nobody died, but I've never moved so fast in my life to climb and get over an 8-meter wall of dirt. Holy. Erin says, later in life, pregnant with my first child, still working in land surveying, I worked during the winter finding land pins in basically no man's land. I was working on a skidoo, and I had equipment on my back. The skidoo flipped over on me. No one seriously hurt, and I counted my blessings. And then there was the time I was working for a company constructing a gas facility. The backhoe hit an existing pipe. It was just outside the inside of the pipe, but there was a real discussion about shutting the job down. Of course, I was the one tasked with digging around the pipe to assess the level of damage. Erin says, this isn't even all of my stories, but I thought it might be incredible for real talkers to process the amount of danger. What I've realized upon reflection after listening to that episode. Erin says, none of these incidents shut down a job by more than 3 days. And that was when OHS shut down our job following that fatality. Erin says, you can't blame me for moving on to study political philosophy instead. That from Erin, who wrote into talk@ryanjesperson.com. It was wild. That wasn't the only email that we received. People talking about workplace safety, dangerous scenarios that they've been put in. One of the interesting conversations we had about Rob was whether or not people stick around and do the work, the dangerous work they're tasked to do, out of fear they're going to lose their jobs. If this is something that you've experienced, we'd be curious to hear from you. You can email the show anytime. Tristin Hopper's coming up in 60 seconds. First, we wanted to remind you that Watermelon Fest is coming up at Friesen Brothers this weekend across the province of Alberta. They're putting the shout out to watermelon lovers everywhere. Friesen Brothers hosting Watermelon Fest, where you can find the fun, and they're also welcoming National Watermelon Queen Jules Singley to some of their stores. You can find out the details at friesen.com/watermelonfest is the 20th and 21st of July, depending on where you live. Edmonton, Fort Saskatchewan, all other stores. They have featured events coming up, and a chance for you to win a $100 Friesen Brothers gift card as well. Plus lots of great stuff for the kids, including free balloons, crowns, and of course watermelon specials through the day. You can find the details again online at friesen.com/watermelonfest. And a big shout out to our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy. This is the time of year when Kubi customers are seeing the biggest return on their investment. These long days, the sun up in there until 10:30. People doing weeding out in their backyards at 11 o'clock at night. Absolutely bonkers. Love it up here in this part of the world. Of course, you know that solar's paying off right now. It also means that their teams are busy installing panels up on rooftops, homes, cabins, cottages, office buildings, farms, you name it. There's a way to go green, and nobody knows it better than the team at Kubi. You can get a free quote today on going solar in your place by visiting kubienergy.ca. Tristin Hopper is the national correspondent, journalist for the National Post, stationed in British Columbia. That's where he joins us. And Tristin, I was telling you just the other day, a guy, a real talker by the name of Binns, stopped me in the street. This was this week. And he said, "What's going on with Tristin Hopper?" And immediately I kind of went, oh boy, because you never know when someone asks an open-ended question like that. What's going on with Tristin Hopper? I don't know. He said,
that's nice. When you told me that, I assumed it was a lie. And then, it was the summer doldrums and you can't get real guests. So
this is not true. This is not true.
And Binns, that's a made-up name.
Yeah.
So
well,
I'm happy to be here anyway.
They call him Binns because he used to and he still operates a business in junk removal. And so that's why they call him Binns. But he told me that you're one of his favorite Real Talk guests, and he wondered why it had been so long since you'd been on the show. And then I checked our archives, and I realized it looked like we were stonewalling you. We weren't. So thanks for making time to come back. It's nice to see your face.
I think me and Binns share a love of junk removal, so that's probably why there's a lot of overlap in our shared interest.
Is this a reference to your recent costume purchases? People that follow you on Twitter might know what you're talking about.
Well, yeah, okay. So there's a lot of downsides to living in Victoria. There's also a lot of upsides. But this is, of course, where Albertans go to die. And when they do die, they usually have a bunch of interesting stuff with them. So I would say my leading hobby here is purchasing things from people who have died. So estate sales, thrift stores. And honestly, the just scope of things that are available here are just unlike anything probably in the world. For instance, I branched out into souvenir spoons. I've always liked the poetry of someone spends their retirement. That retirement could be as long as 30 years.
Yeah.
Everywhere they go, they get a souvenir spoon. It's hundreds of dollars, many years, thousands of kilometers traveled. And then they die. Their family doesn't want it, and then I buy that entire collection for $8. There's just something overwhelmingly poetic about that. So I'll be honest, I've got about 1,000 silver spoons right now.
Actually, for real? Do you have them?
Do you
have them displayed in your house or like in a shoebox?
Well, yeah, I'm in an office right now. I'm surrounded by some of the leading highlights of the spoons. Because honestly,
do you want to turn your camera around so we can see it? Is that possible?
Well, sure.
I think people, if you're going to boast of a collection, oh my gosh, you're not joking. You really do.
Yeah. There's spoons there. Okay. Because you go on a trip and you make some memories and you bring back some souvenirs. Having a spoon from Tierra del Fuego, that's like 15% of the way to actually having traveled there, and it cost me nothing.
As you hold the spoon in your hand, do you feel as though you have traveled to the southernmost tip of South America?
Here's the thing. So my grandpa had a real bad lying problem. Lied about his war record and a whole bunch of other things. But if you say it long enough, you'll eventually believe it. So my plan is just to sort of keep these in my collection, and eventually I'm going to be an old man, and I'm not going to be able to remember, the real life I've lived in sort of the spoon life I've lived. And I think that's going to add to the richness of my experience.
When did you find out that your grandfather had lied about his war service?
Oh, when we looked into, he sort of had a, he had a BSing issue. So we always knew this was sort of an issue. My dad always said growing up, in terms of what traits we want from Grandpa growing up, he's like, I want you to have his ability to sort of BS, but actually back it up with real skills. So there was a pattern throughout his life. He would get just, senior positions at real estate firms or, managerial offices. He looked the part, tall guy, handsome, distinguished, very good at boasting about his own record. And then these places that hired him and very quickly realized he had absolutely no skills whatsoever and had no idea what he was doing. Okay. So that was, we knew that was sort of something that he did. And then when my dad was looking into his record, probably in the late 1990s, we found that he had claimed he'd injured his knee. So the classic example is we have this commemorative Third Reich sword still in the family collection. So he brought this back he was stationed in Germany until 1948. So this is just like a commemorative sword. It's got a swastika, gold and silver at the top. And he always said that he accepted the surrender of a German town, and the Gauleiter presented this to him, like, if you submit to Canadian rule, here's your sword. But then, we look into it. He's a supply sergeant for the RCAF. We're like, well, that doesn't make sense. That's not really, low-level sergeants in the Air Force typically weren't the front lines of accepting surrenders from German officials. So anyway, that's just the tip of the iceberg of sort of where that went. I forget where this is going, but yeah. Well, my family has a lying problem. Except me.
Yeah, except you. You can spin a yarn. You can tell a story. Yeah. You can get people's attention. By the way, you're getting chirped a little bit in the chat. I just wanted to let you know that Tracy is relatively unimpressed with your spoon collection. Tracy says only 1,000. There's so many more.
She has more.
Yeah. Well, Tracy says there's so many more in the wild for you to hoard. She calls you an amateur.
Yeah. I'm working on it.
An amateur.
Well, more people need to die.
Yeah, I guess that could be a segue into me asking you about healthcare, but that might be a little bit cynical. We were talking about
that's a good question, because basically Victoria is sort of the future in a whole bunch of things in terms of healthcare, because whatever healthcare shortage you have in Alberta, and I say this as someone who lives in Alberta not too long ago, the shortages of everything are just so much more acute. So, if the various healthcare shortages we as Canadians are experiencing, eventually everyone will turn into Victoria. We're also the MAID capital of the world. So I'm not sure how much your show has touched on just, how very quickly MAID has expanded. The number of sort of assisted suicides are being approved. That's completely on steroids on Vancouver Island. So I think across Canada, it's like 3% of all deaths. Vancouver Island, it could be as high as 10%. So
10% of all deaths?
Yeah. So, that's, we don't sort of have region specific, but Vancouver Island is indisputably the highest across Canada. And I just personally within my social circle, I struggle to think of someone who hasn't died by assisted suicide in the past few years that I've known who's died.
I'm sorry to hear about that.
Now, again, that's part. No, and now again, part of that is just because we are so elderly. So
yeah, like we've had some people in our circle that have chosen to go that route, and in most circumstances with the support of their families. To be honest with you, we haven't talked about it a ton on the show. A little bit. I'm happy to talk about it. I think that medical assistance in dying is a good option for people to have. I think that it brings dignity to a situation where otherwise a person might die by suicide anyway, but in a less, well, I people can use their imagination. It would be less dignified. It would be less of a sort of with professional.
I think there's so much support for it,
right? And there is support.
People forget there's sort of two layers of medical assistance in dying. So the original medical assistance in dying, that had broad-based support. I mean, you had substantial amount of the Conservative caucus voting for it. This was back in 2016. And that one was, okay, I mean, if you're reasonably expected to die, you can get medical assistance in dying. And I think so many people supported it because everyone, I can't think of anybody who this doesn't apply to, saw an elderly relative or a parent get Alzheimer's, dementia, and just have a very long, drawn out, crushing death right at the end. So kept alive by medical means in an earlier era, they would have, just died at 71, but instead you've just got that 5 years where they don't know what's going on. They're scared. So I think that's why you had widespread support for medical assistance in dying. And then you sort of had the second layer of that, which is where now we didn't end up going forward with the aspect which said you could MAID someone if their only underlying condition was a mental illness. We didn't go that far. But yeah, I think it's fair to say, and I've looked at other regimes around the world, there's only about a dozen countries or so that have legal assisted suicide. Canada is easily the most liberalized. We give it for the most conditions. We have the fewest checks. And that's why I think we do have the fastest growing rate. So a place like Oregon, just south of me, puts in a medical assistance in dying. I don't know what they call it, a euthanasia law. And they're very strict about who it applies to. And I think it's very similar to our first one. If you have a terminal illness and this is approved by doctors, yes, you can get euthanasia. So euthanasia rates went up and they've sort of stayed stable. That hasn't happened in Canada. It goes up by 30% every year that we brought it in. And we don't know when that's going to top out. And if Vancouver Island is guide, maybe it tops out at about 10% of all deaths.
We're talking to Tristin Hopper. If you're just joining us, live streaming the audio in the Mixler app presented by California Closet. So just as we've been talking, I've just been calling up some stats on the fly. So this is what I could find in 3 minutes. So I have numbers for 2022. This per StatsCan. In 2022, there were 13,241 MAID provisions reported in Canada. So in other words, 13,241 Canadians died with medical assistance.
Right.
That accounted for 4% of all deaths in Canada. 4.1% of all deaths in Canada. Again, these are 2022 numbers, so these are 2 years old. The number of cases of MAID in that year, in 2022, represented a growth rate of more than 30% over the year before. So that's significant, but you have to consider as well, relatively new program. So that also makes sense.
Yeah, you're going to see a spike.
And then I'll reference reporting here. This is journalist Graham Wood for the Tri-City News, reporting back in February of 2023. So again, this is more than a year old. But according to Statistics Canada, still strong support for medical assistance in dying for MAID in British Columbia, which has the highest per capita use of the program in the country. In 2021, so Tristin, keep this in mind, numbers will have jumped significantly from 3 years ago. 10,064 people across the country used MAID. 2,030 of them were from BC, so approximately 20% of the total deaths in the country, while BC accounts for just 13% of Canada's population. So those are just some interesting numbers for context. Again, 2-3 years old, some of those statistics, but it's kind of interesting. There's obviously a lot of concern around MAID as well. People are talking about, and I've seen advocates speaking out against people that are choosing medical assistance in dying when and again, you got to be careful here when you start talking about other options people should consider or the right decision for somebody. Nobody knows the best decision for them better than them and their loved ones, but you hear of a lot of people talking about living in desperate circumstances. Some people, I've seen some family members speaking to journalists across the country, and not just limited to Canada, but here, certainly, that people have been counseled allegedly toward MAID or encouraged to consider MAID, which I don't think that's the point. But again, I'm sitting here in a privileged perch, right? I'm not living with a terminal illness right now. So
yeah. So I think if you look at just sort of, the broad mainstream Canadian position on MAID, I think it's, we don't want, if someone has completely lost their mind, they're confused, and, they are at the end, but it just takes, 5 years, they should be able to make a choice that they can, or not even 5 years, but anyway, if you're in extreme pain, terminal illness, you should be able to end that earlier artificially rather than being kept alive by medical science. I think that's when you look at polls which show we do broadly support euthanasia. But yeah.
Do you support it?
I had a close family member, go through it. And she was 101 years old. full of life. Her decision at the end, and full of life, stayed alive. This is someone who I never would have imagined would have gone this route, but basically said, every day it's harder. I'm going blind. I'm going deaf. I'm in pain. Life now is not the life that I have known. Now I'm sick. I'm in the hospital. The recovery is going to take 6 months. I just kind of want to check out. So it was just, it actually wasn't a case of a terminal illness. She was sick at the time. But I don't think among the family, among myself, I was very close to her. I didn't see that as sort of a controversial choice. So, and again, that's sort of the hinge point of euthanasia is that the counter argument to that would be, well, aren't you cheapening life? Because at the stage that my grandma, okay, it's my grandma, when she checked out with MAID, I'm sure a disability rights group could say, well, okay, the quality of life she was living is pretty standard for someone with, a number of sort of challenging disability conditions. There's plenty of people who are blind and have mobility issues who can live very fulfilling lives. So I guess the counter argument to that would be if you have a medical system that gets used to the idea that a degradation of quality of life equals death, this could spread to other areas. So that's the counter argument I've heard. I will say I was interested. This cause of death for MAID, and I explained this to her before she went through the procedure, exactly the same as Michael Jackson, propofol overdose.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, because obviously Michael Jackson died accidentally. He took too much propofol.
Yeah.
But they hit you with too much propofol to kill you.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, the whole thing, like, your Tristan's grandma could live a fulfilling life to 105, 106, like, despite blindness and deafness. I think this is like armchair philosophy.
Yeah, because I think at the root,
but this is somebody else's.
Like, I'm tired of living.
But and like, I guess, like, I hate, like, it's cards on the table. It's hard for me to talk about death by suicide right now. I lost a friend like a month ago, and so I'm still very, like, kind of, I'm just talking about it. I have a visceral reaction, but I will say, like, it is if anybody is having thoughts about suicide, I encourage you to call the National Suicide Hotline. I just want to say that right now before I make my comments, because we have a responsibility as a show. You can text or call 988 24/7 in Canada, in English and in French. Help is available. You can speak with somebody today. Tristin, since humankind has, been around, life is precious, but death has always been an option. And people can determine their own fate in many different ways, in many different contexts, and people have always had that right. It's, in most circumstances, tragic. And in some circumstances, in a MAID-type circumstance, though, like I said, I believe that it brings peace to families. I believe it brings dignity to families. I've heard from a friend of mine tell me firsthand, I don't think he wants it, his name said on the show, but this is a personal friend of mine whose mother passed away. And you know what they did, Tristin? They basically held, like, a backyard garden party, absolutely beautiful, spared no expense. It was like her celebration of life while she was there. Yeah. And they had, food to eat, and they had garden drinks, and they had music, and she was there, and she was wearing her favorite dress, and people had a chance to spend time with her and to laugh and to cry, and everybody knew, that at like 7:00 that she was going to pass away. And at whatever time it was, let's say it was 7:00, they made an announcement, and they let everybody know that, if you'd like to stay, she invites you to stay. And if you'd rather leave, then you can leave. And they all said goodbye to her. And then she said goodbye. And as he tells this story, he tells it with a full heart. Like, he misses his mom like crazy, but his mom was living with a degenerative disease. She was seeing the impact of it on a daily basis. And she didn't want to go where the disease was going to take her. And I just think that people I guess I'm not here to like get on a soapbox and make an argument for MAID, but I do think that there is a place in a society where it works and where I think it represents a civilized society. But there are concerns. I mean, like Ms. B, for example, in our live chat right now says there's major concerns in the disability community involving folks who don't legally make their own medical decisions, especially if they can't communicate their own thoughts. I mean, there's one point of 1,000 good points we could hear on this. I'm grateful you brought it up. We haven't really talked much about this.
Oh, yeah. Because, in my case, I would say it's, very uncontroversial. Just someone who had a spark of life. To make that decision, just I'm done. I've seen it all. I mean, that's essentially what it was. Because again, there was no terminal illness in that case, so you could argue even the legality was sort of a little. But say grandma in that scenario is 71 years old and is relatively healthy, history of severe depression, history of substance abuse, and makes a decision the family does not agree with.
Yes,
to take because we've that we have had reports of that. We've reported on it in the National Post, in which you do have everybody has your troubled family member. That troubled family member, this happened to a few families. They go to the hospital and then they say, "Oh, I'm approved for MAID," and you're like, "What?" He's otherwise healthy. He's severely depressed. He's attempted suicide. Don't give him euthanasia. So yeah, I think and it's. So I think the type you're talking about, the kind of garden party end of life, I think almost everybody wants that. That's probably an 80-20 issue, 80% in support, 20 against. But we also have a regime, like a lot of laws lately, which with very few checks to stop the case I just mentioned.
Did you pay attention at all to that story out of Calgary about the father that was trying to block his daughter's MAID application? This is he's just. It was in the news again in April as the father abandoned his appeal, but the ruling came down in March in the Court of King's Bench. A Calgary judge ruling that the 27-year-old who lives with autism can go ahead with her requested death with MAID, despite her father's concerns. Her dad's been fighting for an injunction in court trying to block this. It was a story that I was paying attention to. I can't imagine what that's like for a parent and for the daughter as well, who has her own wishes. But you look at this and Tristin, like you said, 27 years of age, people go, well, that's not exactly how the narrative's supposed to go, but every circumstance is different. Yeah, I don't know. I guess the opinions that matter most on this are the people most directly affected by it. You do talk about a couple of serious red flags, histories of mental illness, histories of substance use or abuse. Those types of things obviously have to be considered. And I think that's where the public gets hung up.
And they can be controlled for. So, there are, I think there are systems, mostly like the way it's sort of conducted in the U.S. states. So there's a few U.S. states that have brought this in. They haven't really had those edge cases that we have had. So I mentioned sort of, Oregon, Colorado, the hippie states have brought in euthanasia. And I think they have been much more controlled about sort of limiting it to cases of terminal illness and, various exceptions. So for that reason, they're not really getting the headlines that we're getting of, someone who should not, most people broadly agree should not be being approved for MAID.
Travis on the super chat wants to know what type of headphones Tristin is using.
Oh, these are really old. These are my. I think they the things missing. I think they're Telex. So these are sort of made in USA. These were 1970s sort of vintage. This is what you would buy to listen to records. They last forever. Because modern headphones, even a $200 pair is usually going to kind of crap out after a while. These things are bulletproof; they go forever. All of my headphones are vintage.
Tracy's in our live chat says resilience is different for all individuals. I recommend family, friends, and colleagues fully understand the symptoms before passing judgment. This is one of those things too, and you talk about like Canadian law and some of the real personal things like health law, for example. It's like everyone's got an opinion on a lot of stuff, but not all opinions are equal in this one. Do you know what I mean? Like the opinion of someone who's living with terminal cancer, who's in incredible pain every single day, or the opinion of somebody, I don't know why I'm sort of like hesitant to name certain diseases as those to imply those living with those diseases should qualify. That's not what I'm getting at. But let me just say, like, degenerative neurological conditions as an example. Somebody who's just received a devastating diagnosis of something that they've suspected was brewing in their brain or their body, and they know how it's going to end, and they don't want to be that person. I'm more inclined to care more about what that person thinks than I am some like keyboard warrior that's never experienced any of this in their life and is just going out to troll people and pick a fight online. Do you know what I mean? I don't see every opinion.
You're coming up with a controversial opinion that we shouldn't listen to keyboard warriors, trolls who have no dog in the fight.
I adopted this controversial position, but just a short time ago. You might be surprised how long it took me to stop giving a shit about what people say on Twitter. It was relatively recently. I want to bring this back to what kick-started this conversation about healthcare in Canada and about access to doctors. And we talked to Dr. Parks, president of the Alberta Medical Association, yesterday, and he cited BC as one of the provinces that's doing a great job, but it takes a lot more dough, Tristin, doing a great job not just retaining family doctors, but recruiting them as well. Dr. Park said for the province of Alberta to do what BC did would cost about $250 million, but it represents a real cash infusion into clinics and into practices that will convince doctors to stay, convince them to hire or bring on other doctors, convince doctors coming out of residency to stay or to go to BC type thing. And after he mentioned BC, we did a bit of digging. This was interesting. This story out of February, British Columbia has seen 700 more family docs, 700 more since revamping their payment structure. So while the struggles are evident, healthcare strains across the country, BC, it appears, at least on the family doc front, doing a better job than Alberta right now. Not to say that Alberta can't do something about it, but it's kind of interesting for your neck of the woods.
Yeah, it's one of those... I know it's controversial to say that there's sort of simple solutions, but I've written a few times about the doctor shortage. And this is one of those things where you get in touch with doctors and see, like, why is there a doctor shortage? And they're like, oh, like, we can get into the complex factors, but the reason that overlies everything else is you get paid basically nothing as a doctor. So BC doctors, so I don't know, I haven't looked into the new payment structure, but when I was writing the story, I was saying, well, if you're a family doctor, you bring on a patient and they make an appointment, no matter what that appointment is, you get a flat rate. I think it was like $30. So you come in and someone says, oh, my finger hurts. That's $30. Someone says, I think I have cancer. Can I get a referral? And you spend half an hour with them talking. That's $30. Flat rate, $30 for everything. So if you're so you're a doctor, you've got your student loan payments to pay off. You cover the entire office. You pay a receptionist in front. You pay for the materials. You pay for insurance. So all of the overhead, and then you're getting paid, $30 per appointment, and it could last 5 minutes. It could last 15 minutes. It could last 20 minutes. So just any other contractor out there, if you ran anything under this, like you're an auto mechanic, and someone just brings in. You do diagnosis of automotive problems, and it's just a flat rate of $30, no matter how complex it is. We are very quickly going to have a shortage of auto mechanics because that doesn't make any fiscal sense to them. And then also on top of this also surprised me. We artificially limit the quantity of doctors that we train each year in Canada. This sounds crazy, but it's true. In our medical schools, because we decided a long time ago, if we train too many doctors, we're going to have a glut of doctors. So I think it's under the Canada Health Act that we do this. We artificially limit the amount of doctors that we can train each year. So each medical school will say, okay, this many doctors, and you could see it if you search doctor quota. Each school says we're only allowed to train this many doctors per year. So so you can't make any money as a family physician. And then second of all, we actually limit the amount of doctors that we are training. So obviously that's going to cause a limit in doctors.
Yeah, we've actually got you get like a couple emails every year from families. It's typically parents. Sometimes it's from would-be medical students, but oftentimes from parents that are frustrated that their kid with straight A's can't get into med school, and sort of lamenting that as they see the parallel storyline like you're talking about a lack of family docs, a shortage of family docs, and it is something we want to keep an eye on. I want to ask you about, you tweeted about JD Vance, about Trump's running mate, his pick for vice president, essentially, and his family history, which I thought was pretty interesting. But I want to ask you, how you're wrapping your mind around the whole, I mean, it's like, seems like the whole world's kind of moved on from the Trump assassination attempt, but I'm still stuck on that, man. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around that. More with Tristin Hopper in just a quick second. I know we have to let you go, Tristin, in 10 minutes, but right now I need to let you know that California Closets team is ready to talk to you with a free consultation. If you're considering, it could be a luxury, all the bells and whistles type walk-in closet in your dream home, the one that you've always envisioned, or maybe you just need to get your boot room organized. No matter the scope and scale of the project, they've got the team that can design the perfect install, and then the install team that can pull it off. And all of it comes with a lifetime guarantee. How great is that? Nothing to lose with that free consultation. That's where it all starts. You can book that today at californiaclosets.ca. And as we look across the country right now and recognize that Canadians are being displaced and impacted almost every element of their lives by wildfire, in some circumstances, it could be a water main break, a sewer break, a flood. Maybe people are experiencing smoke damage. Maybe you're doing a home reno and all of a sudden you've opened up a wall to find a whole bunch of black mold. You don't know what to do with it, but you know you got to do the right thing for you and your family. Complete Care Restoration needs to be your number one stop, your first call. For more than 25 years, they've been restoring properties and rebuilding peace of mind. They're ready to respond 24/7. Their team of trained and certified professionals. You can contact them on their website. That's completecarerestoration.ca. Tristin Hopper, our guest, national columnist, journalist for the National Post. Tristin, obviously everybody on Saturday evening, I think, shocked to see what went down in Bethel, Pennsylvania, as former President Donald Trump on the campaign trail ahead of the RNC narrowly escapes assassination. A bullet grazing his ear. It's spawned some of the most remarkable photos that we've ever seen. The one that Johnny's showing us on YouTube right now, my guess is will win a Pulitzer Prize this year, for sure. And we're starting to learn a little bit more. The FBI's letting us know a little bit more about the shooter, Thomas Matthew Crooks, 20 years of age. Limited social media posts, doesn't appear to have been sort of like purporting extreme political views, not even really that politically involved, it seems. A relatively young kid, had never voted in a presidential election before, but the FBI releasing that on July, or ahead of the shooting rather, he had posted on an online gaming website, July 13th will be my premiere. Watch as it unfolds. Are you as blown away as I am, as directors of the Secret Service are being confronted on the floor of the RNC? I mean, there's more buzz around this from Republican commentators, obviously, than anybody else, that this shooter was able to get so close to Trump, that he was visible on the rooftop for 20 minutes before the shooting. I mean, how are you wrapping your mind around this?
Oh, just massive failure. I mean, government failure is sort of the theme of today's era. So, I think... Wow. It's just a huge screw up. Yeah, in terms of motives, one thing to note, the last major sort of security breach against a president, remember, that guy took a shot at Reagan in 1980, I think, to impress Jodie Foster. So there's any number of reasons that people take a shot at a president, and most of them are crazy when you look at actually presidential assassins. The guy who shot McKinley, I thought he was going to become... I think he did it because he had some delusion that he was going to become Secretary of State or something. So in terms of just, the straight up political motivation, like, the guy who shot Lincoln, or, you could argue with Lee Harvey Oswald. I think that's sort of the minority case. Usually it's just you're nuts and you have an apolitical quest for fame. But yeah, it's crazy that the breach happened. And it's weird. You mentioned people moving on to it. Have you ever been on a highway and you almost miss just some completely deadly incident? You just, a truck just flies right past you. If it had been 2 inches to the right, you're potentially injured or killed on the highway. And you're like, oh my God, my life flashed before my eyes, and you kind of deep breathe for 30 seconds and then you forget about it. that's the closest you have ever come to the Reaper, and you may not even remember it that night. So I think if this assassination had been successful, I mean, there's no telling how screwed we would all be in terms of consequences. Like the institutional trust in the United States is so high, mistrust is so high in the United States. I think a substantial number of Americans would never believe that this had just been a massive, because the screw up is so huge. They'd be like, well, how could you leave a guy on a roof and not know he's there? And then now our candidate is dead. This is someone, you've been, your department, the Democratic-led Department of Justice has just been prosecuting endlessly from every direction. How are we supposed to believe this wasn't engineered? And then you've got any number of consequences that spiral out from this.
Militias, civil war. Like, I'm not joking. Like, I 100% agree with you. I said this on the show earlier this week. Like, can you imagine if Trump had actually been killed?
I don't want to invite other people to listen to other podcasts, but the rest is history.
That's okay.
Leading history podcast. They're right now doing a series on the origins of the First World War. And that, of course, was a guy getting shot in Serbia. The Rwandan genocide started with an assassination. So assassinations, I think more than almost anything, can very quickly spiral into unintended consequences that get tens of thousands, if not millions of people killed and screw up everything for generations. I had close family members saying like, oh, yeah, you should have aimed straighter. I hate Trump. Yeah. And I'm thinking, like, do you have any idea, context, like how screwed we all would have been if that bullet had hit home?
100%. I 100% agree with you. Tracy in our chat says, I'm finding the conversations about the security mistakes to be fascinating. Why isn't Trump more upset about the mistakes? That's out of character for him. I share Tracy's question. I can't believe that Trump's not. Maybe, I don't know, maybe psychologically, like maybe it's just the veneer of the exterior, what he's presenting.
He still has Secret Service sort of surrounding him. So that's kind of an awkward position. You go to a rally and you're like, the Secret Service are all losers, DEI hires. And then, you're still surrounded. You're looking at them and they are sworn to take a bullet for you. So
yeah,
I don't think that's atypical in which a president will have his life put in severe jeopardy by the Secret Service. And there's still, they don't want to alienate anybody in them, because in terms of just like, contact, that's one of the weird things about like ex-presidents. Sometimes Secret Service, that's your social circle. It's, your close family and the agents that are always around you. So the sort of personal bond between president or an ex-president and their security detail is sort of very surreal. So I can understand why they're not going at that directly.
Because you are most people don't know this, British Columbia's Father of the Year. You will be doing school drop-off in 3 minutes, and I endeavor now to ask you two very different questions over the course of 3 minutes, and I think we can pull it off. You tweet on July 17th, one more note about U.S. politics. You say, in terms of major party presidential and VP nominees, what's the last one that had as fucked up a family background as JD Vance? Tell Real Talkers one thing they probably don't know about the.
I looked into this. I think it's Bill Clinton, actually. It's surprising given how much attention Bill Clinton otherwise gets, but he had a really screwed up background under maybe not like, Vance has been quite open about it. Drug addicted mom, 15 sort of boyfriends circling through the house. So, just the absolute worst way to bring up a kid. Bill Clinton sort of grew up in similar circumstances, sort of an abusive stepdad, unpresent father. And then there's no abuse or drugs in Obama's background, but again, the similar sort of amount of family chaos. So that is interesting. I would say a sharp contrast to, say, Canadian prime ministers, who almost all come from good homes, except for the first one. John A. Macdonald, his brother, I think, was murdered by a farmhand who was drunk at the time. So he came from real traumatic background. But it is. I think JD Vance is still at the top, just in terms of like statistically who is least likely to reach the highest echelons of U.S. politics because of your insane family background.
Sure, yeah. And also maybe to have like a much more like, and I'm not saying he does. I know virtually nothing about this guy, and I'm trying to level up my understanding quickly. But
his best friend, I don't know if you touch on this angle, His best friend from Yale, because they have similar sort of chaotic family backgrounds, is in the Canadian House of Commons, Jamil Javani, the
Really?
MP from Durham.
The former radio host.
Yeah.
Like a new MP, Jamil Javani is. Yeah,
very, very new. So
featured on
I
the
think
cover
the
of
National Post
Maclean's.
was like, do you want to write about JD Vance? And he's been kind of quiet about it, maybe deliberately.
Interesting.
But, you could have a situation in which the Vice President of the United States, his best friend, is in the Canadian House of Commons and potentially as a senior conservative position. I don't think that's ever happened.
I've been emailing him, Giovanni. I'll have to see if he'll do an interview on Vance. I wasn't aware of that connection. Tell us real quick before you go. We'll bring you back once it's completed and ready for people to download. What's this? You're working on a podcast about Alberta politics. Bible Bill Aberhart. What's going on?
No, this is a podcast mini series. So we did highly produced podcast, 6 hours worth. In which I look into an aspect of sort of Canadian history that I think is maybe misremembered or we don't remember. So I could touch on one of them, metrication. As a child of 1987, I had no idea how controversial metrication was. So, and how absolutist it was. So throughout the 1970s, I mean, I'm sure anybody who sort of remembers this era and is an Albertan is going to remember how controversial this was, how people went to the wall to sort of stop metrication, and how it was ultimately successful. So Canadians we have this weird measuring system. It's sort of one of the most notable things about us, that we do pool temperatures in Celsius, but we do pool temperatures in Fahrenheit. We do cooking in Fahrenheit, but we do outdoor temperatures in Celsius. So that weird dog's breakfast of measurements, nobody else does that. And that is very deliberately the truce lines put in by a strong anti-metric, screw the man, don't tell me what to do movement that was ultimately successful. So the government wanted to completely convert us to metrication. But where they stopped and where we have this sort of weird mixture of measures, that's right around the early 1980s when you had a pushback. I wouldn't compare it to sort of the movement against the carbon tax, but at one point during metrication, you're going to have a bunch of progressive conservative MPs buying a gas station and then selling gas by the gallon, which was illegal because you had to sell it by the liter.
Okay.
And calling this like the Freedom gas station and then, daring the feds to arrest them for it. So that's, one aspect. People took this very seriously and they won. And that's why we don't measure our height in meters.
Wow. I've never really thought of it. I would not be able to tell anybody right now, even remotely close, what my height is in centimeters. I have absolutely no idea. But isn't it funny? We're like, it's a beautiful day for a barbecue, 28 degrees. Go ahead and get it out to 350.
It's on our driver's licenses. I'm 181 centimeters.
Did you just check, or do you
no,
know
I
right
just
now?
know because it's on my license.
Do you know how many kilos you are?
No, that like stones or whatever.
I'd have to. No, stone would be UK, but yeah, I'd have to go
79.
Look at you, slim and slender, pal. Hey, go do school drop off. Thank you for making yourself available. We love hanging out. Have a great rest of your summer, and we'll talk to you when that podcast miniseries
and
is ready.
And thank you to Bins.
Oh yeah, Bins is gonna love that. Bins is gonna love that. Bins from the Junk Guys.
School drop off
for
in
free.
July.
Yeah, maybe it's probably preschool or day
okay,
school, or he's
yeah.
gonna. Well, he simply said, "I've got to drop off my youngin." So maybe not school. Although there is the school that goes year round.
Oh, there is, yeah.
Yeah, maybe that. Hey, how would
That's
you
the
have felt as a
punishment
kid
school.
if you were the year-round
kidding.
school? Although they probably get way bigger breaks. I think that people do it across the provinces. I think it's like, isn't it on a school district by school district?
What about back in the day? I never had to do it when you had to like make up when you didn't do as well, and you had to go to school and like make up a credit or two here or there. Oh.
First thing I've searched, sorry to interrupt,
Go ahead.
Edmonton, I just searched year-round schools, Alberta. First one that came up, Edmonton Catholic School Division has 3 schools offering a year-round calendar. The year-round, okay, so they still get a summer break, but it's shorter. They return mid-August. Then they have a 2-week break in October, which would be nice, a November break, a 2-week Christmas break, which is the same as the rest, and then a 2-week spring break in March. And so the number of instructional days is the same, but they get like longer. Would you prefer? I don't know.
I was just thinking about that. I like the break in October because you go back to school and it's like hell for like the first 6 weeks. I like spread out breaks. I feel like the same thing with the week we took off work the other day. I feel like the third day I was like, oh, this is dragging on. And then you get back to Monday and you're almost like, I mean, I was recharged, but I feel like if we had 2 days instead of 5 or whatever. Something Tristin said that really hit me was when he said, have you ever had that aha or like close to death moment on the highway? No. I've had that one, and I remember it so vividly driving from Kelowna to Penticton. A deer ran across the highway. I'm going like 110. If anyone's ever driven from Kelowna to Penticton, winding roads around mountains, and there's nothing. You don't stop forever for about 45 minutes to an hour, and just whew. And if I had been going 1 kilometer more an hour, or if that deer ran out a second later, it would have been right through the windshield. But that really hit me when he was talking about it. But then I haven't thought about it for two and a half years until he said that.
You wonder if there's like a psychological thing where your brain kind of flushed it away.
Pushes it away. I was thinking
pushes it away because if you think about it too much.
Traumatic, right? Yeah.
My buddy Brandon, his dad Dave, Dr. Dave, down in Calgary, a chiropractor, a real beauty of a guy, was friends with my mom when they were like, I think late teens into their 20s. And you know those MGs, those British sports cars?
Yeah.
Like beautiful, super cool little cars, but there's not much to them.
No.
He was driving an MG on the highway, hit a moose.
What?
And the moose, I mean, obviously the car was written off, but Dr. Dave, not yet a doctor, survived. The moose went over him. Like he hit it, I guess, as I obviously wasn't there, sort of like took the moose out at the knees, and then it went over him and landed behind him and obviously crushed the car. Wow. But I mean, can you freaking imagine? Yeah.
But anyways, I really related to his the metaphor or whatever he used there. It's so true with the Trump thing right now. Like people think this is bad, but if the shooter had been successful, I agree with Tristin, we would be in a heap of shit right now. Not just because, it's obviously horrible when somebody gets murdered live on TV, but also because of just the civil uprising would just be insane.
Well, Tristin said it well, and I saw this as well from Adam C., who's in our live chat. Adam says, this talk about too bad he missed is an absolutely disgusting sign of moral decay within whoever says it. Tristin hit the nail on the head. Is like there would be millions or tens, like put it this way, last time Trump was on the ticket, more than 50 million people voted for him.
Yeah.
Okay, so that you can, that's where I'm picking my number from. There would be approximately, there would be tens of millions of people who would believe that this was an assassination commissioned by the President of the United States. Or by the Democrats, or by the Illuminati, or by whatever. But you take a look at where polling's at. You take a look at the momentum of Trump. Like Tristin said, he's been prosecuted. He's been convicted in the courts. The narrative is there. They've been trying to do everything to prevent Trump from getting elected again. And then all of a sudden, a shooter's up on the roof for 20 minutes with no police interaction. I saw a video everyone's probably seen it. I'll cite the Twitter account Newsweek had released this video yesterday. It's a guy on his phone, and he's like, yeah, look, he's talking to his girlfriend or his wife.
Yeah,
he's like, he's like, there he is, there's the shooter. And then he like zooms in, and there's a guy, like the guy, just crawling around just getting himself comfortable, and just getting himself in a position. And the guy's going, officer.
You can hear a woman in the back too being like, get him, and nothing's happening. Trump's just talking in the back calmly. It's pretty crazy. Another thing I think Tristin kind of hit the nail on the head is like, I don't know if he alluded to it, but like I don't think this shooter had any kind of political agenda. I don't think he had a manifesto. I don't think he was a crazy person. I think what we're looking at here more and more as we see the information coming out is what we see when people do this sometimes is just someone who is looking to be famous for doing something insane. A young person who was probably mentally troubled, who just, maybe they were depressed. I don't know. I can't try to speculate, but I just see from the information that someone who's not on social media is not someone who's politically engaged. Someone who's not posting all the time, somebody who doesn't leave some sort of letter or, isn't at least like involved in some sort of groups that are right or left wing. Like this guy was a nobody.
Unless it wasn't a political assassination, like Tristin
That's what
says.
I'm saying. It was just like someone trying to get some clout.
You're trying to, you're trying to get Jodie Foster's attention,
exactly.
or something, something
exactly.
like that. We by the way, we have a bunch of people chiming in on year-round school as well, including teachers. Darren is in our chat. Welcome, Darren. Says, as a teacher, he says, I would definitely support year-round school. Interesting. He says getting more time to recharge through the year would be good. So Darren's down with the idea. Meantime, Jillian, also a teacher, junior high teacher. She's been on the show before talking about tech and phones in school. You remember her? Jillian says year-round school. Boo. So Jillian is not down with it. Tracy says most teachers right now probably need all 2 months of their summer. Yeah, anyway, interesting. I mean, teachers know better than the rest of us on what would work best for them. I'm trying to think of as a kid, like, you might think of it, do you want to be stuck in a classroom in the middle of July, but at the same time, you're there with all your friends. And I ask my son every single time, what was your best day? What was your best part of school? What was the best part of the day? Recess. And so recess in July would be pretty sweet.
Of course, all the outdoor activities.
Maybe they wouldn't mind at all. I don't know.
And it's also, free babysitting for the parents. So I can see how a lot of people will be into year-round school.
Yeah, that's right. A couple of things before we wrap. I wanted to put something on your radar, and that is a deadline that is fast approaching. We're talking about families that have experienced loss. What about post-secondary students anywhere in Canada that have lost a parent to cancer? Obviously, they're dealing with the emotions and across life, all of the many different implications of losing a mother or a father to such a horrific disease. But there's the financial pressure as well. And in honor of our dear friend Julie Rohr, the founding member of our editorial board, if you're a regular on this show, that we've established the Real Talk Julie Rohr Scholarship. Every year, at least one post-secondary student across the country, this year there were 3, will receive a $5,000 funding infusion just to take some of the pressure off of their school year. Well, the scholarship applications are due on August 1st. And I want to put this out to every single Real Talk audience member. Maybe this is the first show you've ever heard. Maybe this is the reason why the universe put this show on your radar. If you go to ryanjesperson.com, we'll link to this in the show notes. You go to the Connect link, you'll see a drop-down menu, and you click on Scholarship. That's where you can learn more about the scholarship established in 2021 in honor of Julie Rohr. You can download the application directly from our website. It's fairly straightforward. We're going to ask you a few questions about your professional endeavors, about your post-secondary journey, and about your parents. And our Real Talk editorial board will vet these applications and award at least one scholarship. But the deadline is fast approaching on August 1st. If you know a post-secondary student registered at an accredited institution anywhere in Canada, somebody that's lost a parent to cancer, we invite you to encourage them to apply. If it's you we're talking about, please apply today. Again, that's ryanjesperson.com. Click on the Connect link, and that's where you can download the application for the Real Talk Julie Rohr Scholarship. Coming up on Friday's Real Talk, a bit of a change of pace, as a matter of fact, because it's the summer, and we have a chance to get some people in studio that aren't always in town. They're not always in our neck of the woods. So we're going to forego a Real Talk roundtable, and coming up on tomorrow's episode, that's going to be the 19th of July, we're going to sit down in studio with Canadian Independent Senator Paula Simons. I know that she's a favorite for many of our audience members. We're going to talk about a million different things. If you have a question you'd love for Paula to answer, or a flamethrower presented by DQ, make sure to shoot us an email. We'll talk to you soon.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harman Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjesperson.com.